give me good practice. Just stand, maybe step away from notes to some degree. But I need to add something, or at least change something. The sermon title today is Blessing and Woes, and I just want to put a colon after that, if I may. It was printed, of course, Friday, and who knows what the Spirit has for Saturday and Sunday. So I'd like to add Blessing and Woes, colon, context is everything.
I can't.
Oh, you can't? Carol, is it better this way?
And I even have my hearing aids in.
Is it better here for you?
It's fine.
Hold on. Oh, that's a good point. Okay, if you guys can stay on the crack list, fine with me, and I'm not going to get the practice. I'd like to share a story that kind of enters us into some of my thinking and my reading as I looked at Psalm 1 and Luke 6 and Jeremiah. And it's a story, I think, that kind of moves in the direction where I'd like us to begin to see some of these blessings and woes. It was sometime after our second son was born. I can recall we were in the desert of child rearing. I don't know if you all have been there, but when it seems like a sleepless night is coming, there's no way to escape it. You walk around wakeless, filled with caffeine, not sure which end is up. The children still have needs. And it's just one of those difficult times. Compounding that, of course, Katie and I were far away from our families. I'm from California, Katie's from Ohio, and we were living in North Carolina. I had finished grad school and was a youth director, and Katie was an adjunct professor at the time. So you can fill in the blank that we weren't swimming in money. We had mortgages, children, lots of coffee, and things were tight. Conversations were even tighter because we couldn't quite sustain what we were doing. We didn't have enough time and we didn't have enough money. And I remember a friend, he's still a friend, he was a colleague at the time, gave us a word of wisdom, a piece of advice that I'm not sure it landed as he intended. I'm sure it came from a good place and a good heart, but for some reason it just sort of irked me. And I'll share with you what he said. He said, Adam, Katie, he looked at us one Sunday, he said, bloom where you're planted. And I mean, it's good advice. It is. To some degree, we all need to own our own happiness. We can't expect any single person or any single career or any single thing to fill us. Part of that is our responsibility. I get it. But at the time, with limited social support, a child who wasn't developing as a typical infant does, bloom where you're planted felt a bit more like grit your teeth and bear it. Don't ask for too much, Adam and Katie. Be happy with what you have. Context, I found, is everything. So I'd like to read Psalm 1, if I may. Some of you may know this by heart. I think I almost do. In this translation, the NRSV in Psalm 1 has happy are those. And that's a good translation. It's from the Greek translation, or the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Testament, where blessedness took on a happy tone. But blessedness is also respect. It goes deeper. It's dignity. So you can hear that as well. So hear from Psalm 1. Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on God's law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither, and all that they do they prosper. The wicked are not so. They are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Psalm 1 at first glance gives us a somewhat cut and dry perspective on blessings and woes. Righteousness leads to blessings, and woe to the wicked. It feels more like a proverb than a song. And it offers two juxtaposed images. One of the wicked that will vanish, like chaff in the wind. And chaff, of course, I have never done this. So how dare I say of course. I understand I'm in the Midwest, and I have no doubt that there are farmers or folks who grew up farming that may very well be able to explain this. But as I understood it, reading, chaff is what happens as you beat out the wheat, that's been collected, and the chaff, or what is not needed to make bread or grain, then bounces up, and the wind, and it's as if it's dust that blows away. The other image is the one of righteousness that will deepen their roots into an unending stream, which produces fruit and leaves that will not wither. The way that Psalm 1 offers is quite clear. Shun what is wicked, cleave to what is right, and the rest will go perfectly. But of course we know that life is not always that simple. Pain is not always that straightforward or reserved only for the wicked. Poverty is not just the result of bad decisions. Trauma is not your fault. And for those who are able to put #blessed under any tagline, it doesn't mean that they're righteous. You can't judge by appearances. We also know that offering prescriptions of self-help from a religious community don't always go as we intend. I'm guessing some of you may have been wounded by the church. Meditate on Scripture more. That's your problem. You just need to have faith, more faith. And faith in that term is not trust in the goodness of the Lord. Faith in that sense deeply means believe as I believe, which is very different than, in fact, what Abraham was considered when he was reckoned as faithful. It was the trust that God would find the way. And I want to include Sarah in that too. Sarah did what she had to do. Pray harder, serve more, bloom where you're planted, Adam. But I really don't think that simple prescriptive advice is the psalmist's approach. And nor is it Jesus's, as we read in Luke 6. Thank you, Kevin. The lectionary places these scriptures together as they share similar language, blessings and woes. Luke 6 has that same language, blessing and woes, in what's commonly called the Sermon on the Plain. What is so remarkable, however, about the Sermon on the Plain is that it reorients our perspectives as well as our prescriptions. Prescriptions of blessing. Who is in, who's out, who's successful, who's not. Blessed, Jesus said, are the poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the hungry, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep, for you will laugh. The more I look at these words, I'm seeing them not so much as directives, as much as words of healing. Poverty, hunger, all those things could heap shame and judgment, particularly from a religious perspective at the time. But Jesus had something different to offer. Instead, he offered the word blessed, dignity, respect. Like a salve on a wound, or a word of compassion to a friend, or like the image of plenty when all is not. Like a mother who sees everything that her child can be, even when they don't see it for themselves. These are the words that move people to places of nourishment and blessing rather than guilt, shame, or expectation of what they haven't done, or why you can't be more like, pray more like, behave more like, etc., etc. In Christ's eyes, poverty was not a sign of waywardness, it was an opportunity for God's blessing. Hunger wasn't the evidence of a lack of faith, but a moment to see God in all of us. Weeping was not the evidence of lostness, but a moment for tenderness. Any chance that Jesus could speak life, whether it was over Lazarus, or over death, or life over creation. The only ones who didn't get life, you know who they were? The religious elite. Woe to the religious elite. You who heap heavy burdens. Looking back now at Psalm 1 in particular, as well as Jeremiah, I begin to see another point of emphasis in these texts. It's not so much clear-cut divisions, the righteous and the unrighteous. It's images of life or of death. And images that can serve us if we're willing to look. So I'd like to linger with those images for a bit. Let's begin with the image of life. On the side of life, the psalmist gives us an image of rootedness and flourishing. Green leaves that do not fade. You can't even imagine that in Ohio. Fruit that comes on time. It's an image not simply of a tree that stands tall and proud by itself, but a tree centered within an unending stream of nourishment and life-giving support. The tree in Psalm 1 does not bloom wherever it is planted, but it blooms precisely because of where it is planted. Context is everything. The tree, or for the psalmist, the stream was the Torah. For Jeremiah, it was the trust in God's goodness. For Jesus, the stream, the unending stream, was all around. In each and every face that he encountered. Is it any wonder he could say, "Blessed are the poor, the hungry, those who weep"? There was no division. The question that I'd like to ask you all today is, where is that stream for you? Are you in it? Are you far from it? Do you know what the context of nurture feels like? What life-giving words sound like? Do you know what nourishment is? Do you sense yourself blessed or full? Is it at home? At work? Is it with art, studying, meditation, exercise, running, chatting, traveling? And if you're willing, I'd like just to take a moment and ask you and invite you into a space of reflection that simply lets you consider the streams in your life. Where are they? And I'll take 30 seconds just to give silence. Take a page out of Ken's book here. But would anyone care to share a stream? This short.
As an extrovert, I find a stream to be around friends, congregations, with people that create additional energies and feeling of caring within me, for me.
stream.
For me, it's similar to what Beth said. I find life and connection, not just with people, but with other things, and so, you know, but that's for me, that's life. It wasn't that sort of the flow of life,
Yeah.
particularly if speaking, if there's harmony, you know, if there's harmony. Of course, I mean, there's not much connection. There's not just this harmony.
That is no fun. Yeah. The streams of living water. Thank you for sharing. For me right now, it's breathing. I've been trying to breathe. I've been working on doing that and knowing that my thoughts are not me. I know that sounds kind of interesting, but it's a big concept for me right now. The thoughts that go racing around, to step back and actually see them pass by, meditation has become a place of water for me. Where I go, I say, I am not just this endless parade of thoughts. And I must also admit, a calm came over me yesterday when I came in here and sat down. I let in some of the Lyons family who were preparing for the funeral of Nikki this afternoon. I met them at 10:30, opened the door. I was on the Zoom call for the Council of Ministry too. My son was in the narthex, I think, and I couldn't quite find him. I just came and sat down. And this place is very calm. I pray it is for you. Of course, there's another side of Psalm 1. You all know where I'm going. That is of death. It's the dried remains of what's no longer needed. The purposeless chaff. The image that the psalmist gives is one of transience. And in an agrarian society, this image is not without its weight, as livelihood is tied to their sustenance in farming. So how about those areas in your life? Where do you feel utterly dry? When do you turn off? When do you start feeling yourself going negative? You all know what I mean. What time of day do you dread? Now, I won't ask you to share any of these. But I know they're a part of our lives. The problem is that sometimes we settle for that chaff. We settle for that. Maybe it's not wickedness, but it's certainly not purposefulness. It's certainly not the image of abundance that Jesus calls out or that the psalmist has in mind. We become comfortable with the dry. We do bloom where we're planted. But sometimes that's not enough. A gentleman I know was a handyman. He was one of those guys who could do just about anything. His name was Tom. Tom could do anything, he just didn't move all that quickly doing anything. A couple of years before we had met, he started renovating his own home, which he admitted was a slog for him. He said going to fix, renovate, and repair for work, and then coming back home and realizing I had more to fix, renovate, and repair was almost too much. So it had been 2 years since they had started this renovation. They did it smartly, as folks do, in stages. They started with the kitchen as well as their bathroom, because not only are those where you put your money in real estate, in homes, but also because all the plumbing is tied together. So while the walls were off, they decided to tie in the plumbing and do what they can, which meant their kitchen, of course, was in disrepair. Now, for 2 years, they had gone about having their significant appliances downstairs in the basement. But slowly, they were able to pull things back upstairs to the kitchen. When I stopped by the house, Tom had the cabinets in, the countertops were not set, but they were at least laid on there, and they had their stove in place, as well as the microwave. But one thing was missing. It was the refrigerator. that had been in the basement for the past 2 years. I said, Tom, what's that like having the fridge downstairs in your basement? He said, you know what, it's not that bad once you get used to it. I said, how long have you had the fridge? 2 years. He said, yeah, we actually just take a tray with us to make sure we get everything we need, all the condiments, pickles, mayonnaise, lettuce, if you're making a sandwich or a burger. I said, well, do you ever get it all in one tray? He said, no, never, not once. He said, we've got to be back up and down those basement steps at least 20 times to 25 times a day. He says, you know, you never know what you want. The hot chili peppers that you want to add on your rice. You got to run back down there. I said, well, when do you think you'll get the fridge back up here? He said, you know, I'm not sure. We've almost gotten used to the fridge where it is. Then he laughed and said, maybe a little too used to where the fridge is. You know, brain studies have shown that we're hardwired to focus on problems, the negative. For our minds, it's like Velcro. We're attracted to and can adapt around the negative, in fact, very quickly. From an evolutionary perspective, focusing on problems allowed for survival. Seeing the positive, however, well, that's more like Teflon. Just slides right off. Now, this is according to Rick Hansen in his book, Hardwiring Happiness, the new brain science of context, calm, and confidence. For a positive thought, he writes, for a positive feeling or emotion to imprint itself and leave any lasting mark on our brains, we must focus on it for a minimum of 15 seconds. Otherwise, like Teflon, it just slips away. In other words, we all can easily get used to places that have dried up. We can find ways to live with fridges in basements, toxic friends, toxic belief systems, toxic thoughts, the weight of our own expectations, the weight of our own shame of what we thought we would do or should do. Our brain can adapt. You need to give more, pray more, serve more, bloom more. And yes, there's no doubt that from a religious context, we've grabbed hold like Velcro to a God who shuns, judges, smites, scorns, and the list goes on and on. The wicked and the righteous. But the more I read the life of Christ, the love of Christ, I'm realizing that if in your faith and in your walk, if your circle of understanding and compassion is narrowing as you walk in faith, you're going the wrong way. So given what we know about our brains, I'm beginning to see now the wisdom of Psalm 1. Happy or blessed are those who delight in the law of the Lord, who meditate on it day and night. Our brains will fix themselves to the negative. They will adapt and learn to live with anything. But the psalmist invites us to a different place. A place of dwelling on a covenantal relationship that's oriented around the Hebrew word hesed, which means steadfast love. An undying, unending stream of love. Yes, this is the context in which we can dwell, live, thrive, and not just make it. Because as we know, context is everything. We have amazing capacity. We can survive where we are planted. I'm just beginning to see that the psalmist has more in mind than that. The psalmist and the words of Jesus go far beyond images of survival. Not just a flower that's barely making it in a desert, but of a tree that does not wither, that does not need to fight for its nourishment, but has it running right across as its roots go ever deeper. In other words, don't just bloom where you're planted. Go where the stream is. time where you